to the Way to Be podcast, where we talk about all things health professions, partnerships, and practice. We are thrilled today because we have our guest, Tim Stockdale, who is going to talk with us about medical speech pathology. So welcome, Tim.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, just want to make sure you guys know who all's here. So I'm Rachel, and then I'm here with my awesome colleague.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Rosenzweig.
Yep. And so we're going to lead you through today. Like I said, we're thrilled to have Tim with us today. He is passionate about dysphagia education and has taken some major steps in making progress on how can we do this better. So one thing you definitely want to check out from today is the swallowthegap.com website. He's also got a podcast and some other great things we're going to talk about. But first, let's go ahead and get started with some questions, and I'll let Elizabeth start off with the first one.
Thanks. Tim, could you share with us a little bit about your journey to where you are and what you're doing currently in speech pathology?
Oh man, how far back do you want me to go? Because a lot of different things that led to it. I wanted to be in health professions. I'm going way back. It took me a while.
This is great.
What I wanted to do. I was in real estate for a little while and did some other things, had a couple of businesses that didn't work. And I was trying to figure out what in healthcare I wanted to do. And so I ended up getting into speech pathology in undergrad, and I did some shadowing. I was like, yeah, this is fine. Like I could do this. But then I went into a hospital setting and I shadowed somebody in acute care doing a modified barium swallow study. And I was just like blown away. I was like, I thought you would have to be a physician to do this. You're dealing with radiographic studies with the airway, that type of thing. So it really caught my attention. And I know it's kind of cliche, but like since that point, I've been very, very focused on it, very just interested and kind of hyper-focused on that. And so in grad school, I tried to really focus on medically based courses. I didn't go to a quote medically focused program. But it was down at the University of South Florida, and that's when Emily Plowman was there, and she had a Med SLP course, and there were opportunities. I worked at the VA during their 9-month traineeship at Bay Pines with some really brilliant individuals, and so from there, I was very fortunate to get a job in acute care, which is tough out of your CFY. Just a lot of circumstances really lined up, and I had a great mentor, Joyce Payne, there, who was helpful to me. And then from there, that's the kind of the dysphagia part. Really interested in that. I saw a lot of variability in practice. After I left the hospital, Oak Hill, where I was at full time, I went to some other facilities and was doing per diem work, and I saw such variability in practice. And this is a high impact part of our field where we're doing things that influence nutrition, hydration, quality of life, and pulmonary status. And so what I saw is us being so careful in the way that we knew how to be careful, because we were so focused kind of with tunnel vision on the airway and people getting aspiration pneumonia. We want to protect ourselves and blah, 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 all that sort of thing. And so we would be so over restrictive and unknowingly cause issues in other areas like hydration and nutrition. And, these are health professionals listening to this, nutrition is extremely important in healing and hydration. If your kidneys break down, and there's just a lot to it. And so our training was so focused, and it was also kind of shallow for dysphagia, one course and maybe an externship that we didn't know what we didn't know. And we didn't realize the implications of some of the recommendations that we were making. And so I was really fortunate to work with an old instructor, Felix Matias. I'm sorry, I'm throwing names out there, not because I'm dropping like Michael Jordan. Thank you for mentoring me, but because these people have been great. They've been so fantastic, and they totally deserve the recognition for taking risks and just being excellent people and mentors and instructors. And so I don't want anyone to think I'm name dropping. It's really out of gratitude. And so with that, he let me work as a clinical instructor at the University of South Florida for a while. And so I dabbled in the education there. And then long story short, I ended up at Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions, where in Provo, Utah. I'm not working there full time now. I teach adjunct, but I worked there for several years, and they have a great medically focused program, not just for speech pathology, but for other areas too. And so like they allowed me to work in redesigning this curriculum with some colleagues. And we basically turned it into a 3-course series for dysphagia. You had general, kind of big picture stuff, typical swallowing physiology and anatomy, and then moving on to disorders and some other things. And so that's pretty comprehensive of the journey, probably a little more than you've asked for. But right now, so I'm taking that. I'm still teaching in graduate classes. I'm teaching there and at the University of Hawaii unfortunately remotely, but and then doing continuing education in a podcast. And the idea is to get people talking about the things that we need to be focused on, the gaps that we need to bridge. And through conversation, we have this synergistic effect where we're getting the best of everybody. We're getting everybody's perspectives, not just a select few, elite who think that they can do it, but we're getting the entirety of those who are willing to listen and are willing to talk about this. And I think that's where our strength lies, in our collective experience and our collective intellectuality. Intellect. There you go. Intellect. If I talk too much, I forget my words. Sorry.
No, I think I love that you mentioned your mentors. It's funny because as we've had some conversation with other folks, several others have mentioned mentorship, and we've even talked about we need some sort of way to be award for mentors or something, because they were awesome to us, and then now we're able to continue, and I think it speaks to the importance of mentorship and being open to mentoring other people too, and also for younger folks, it's okay to ask for mentorship and ask questions too. So I love that you mentioned that. So tell us more about Swallow the Gap. I mean, you mentioned you saw a need and you're trying to meet that need, but tell us about how did we get there? And then I know you've got really cool things like your live courses and your confounding case studies, and we want to hear about all of it. Tell us about it all.
Well, it's a work in progress. It started with a podcast. So Swallow the Gap is a lot of different things. It began as a podcast to get people talking. You're discussing things with experts or people who have different perspectives in our field, and that gets the conversation going. And it also helps. I was really fortunate in organizing continuing education before this to see just what down to earth, humble people most of these individuals are. And they're not untouchables. They're fantastic mentors and teachers. And so that conversation where you're just chatting about, dysphagia and some other stuff really brings that to the light to me. And I think it makes them more approachable. So people are more likely to reach out to them to discuss their research, to get advice and do those types of things. So that's the podcast. And then, so some of the other things, live webinars where, just a 1-day series on ICU care. We had one in April of 2024 with Martin Brodsky, Kendra Grand, Joe Puntil, and George Barnes. And I had an absolute blast. And one of it's didactic, there's lecture that's part of it, and they're phenomenal lectures. But one of the things that I think is really cool is we sit around and have this discussion panel. It's kind of like a campfire talk where we're just people asking questions, we're following up, and it makes it more interactive and really pulls the audience in. But hopefully by the time this is out, we'll have recorded courses and just a number of different things. This will be after a FEES course, which is a flexible endoscopic evaluation of swallowing. Study is what FEES is. And so we'll be doing one of those in October 2024 in Salt Lake City. And hopefully we'll keep that going because there seems to be a pretty big need, at least on the West Coast, for those types of things. So we'll see. We'll see what it becomes. I'm super excited though, and I've been very supported and blessed in that.
That's great. And it seems like that is one way that professionals who are looking to break in or upskill in this area of our field can really get that continuing education. One thing that you mentioned that really stood out to me as someone who works with undergrad and graduate students is this idea of how do I get into medical SLP? Some students feel like they have to go to a graduate program that really advertises itself as medical, but what if I don't even know about that until it's too late and I'm in grad school? So I'm glad that you shared that there are paths into this area of our profession, regardless of where you start out. What other advice would you have for students or new professionals or even seasoned professionals who would like to break into this niche?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Um, you can, of course, you can get into it, and I'd say most people do without being in a specialized medical program. So much of speech pathology is predicated on self-led learning that you've got to go out and get the continuing education for yourself, and that's predicated on self-reflection. And so for those who are self-aware or who are willing to challenge themselves and look at their areas for growth, that can work. And so I would encourage you, if you're a grad student, try to take as many medically focused courses as you can. Your motor speech disorders, your dysphagia. If there's a medical quote medical SLP course, that's fantastic. And think of ways that you can integrate, even from developmental language courses. Think of how that influences aphasia and language later on in life. So think about integration. So look at it through that lens. Try to get a medical placement. It's really important. And I would steer you toward. I mean, everybody's got their own thing. I would steer you kind of toward acute care or even acute rehab for someone that you've heard is a good mentor, because there's such variability as there are with so many other things that we do in this field. But so if you're a student, that's one thing I would go for. Try to network, try to make connections. It's beneficial, especially if you like people, that's great. You get to make more friends. But at the same time, people are tremendously helpful. I think by nature we want to do good for other people, at least most of the time. And so I think that becomes very, very beneficial. But after that point, try to get networked, try to talk to people. They help to make you aware of your blind spots, not necessarily by just critique, but if we're talking about something and I hear such and such say something that I'm unfamiliar with, I'm like, oh man, like I'm a little bit behind the curve. I've got to go look into that. And so that helps continuing education courses. But really, I think that our field is kind of due for in some way, an overhaul. Not that it has to be, complete overhaul or anything like that, but there's some things that I think need to change to help make it better.
Okay, so tell us those things.
Those things. Okay. Well, mm, okay. I'm going to sit on this, uh, my kind of idealistic pipe dream of
We like big ideas. We like
Yes.
big ideas.
yeah. Well, there are drawbacks to certain things. People are like, make it a doctorate. And like, okay, that's fine. But are you going to make reimbursement proportional to your student debt now? Because you're going to
Right.
be paying more for school. And maybe you can, maybe there's a way to do that. I don't want to say that there isn't. And maybe there's another idea that somebody else has thought of or mentioned that I haven't. The thing that I like the idea of in undergrad, giving us a lot more focus on health science courses, general physiology, nutrition, those types of things. And really, instead of trying to do everything, 9 diagnostic categories, be more focused and specialized. So there are going to be a lot of overlap in certain courses. Like we all need to learn cranial nerves. We all need to learn anatomy of the speech and hearing mechanism, those types of things. So identify that. Identify what everyone needs to know, whether or not they're going to go into a medical setting or they're going to go into a school setting, and make that overlap, but then track people after that. So one, getting more comprehensive, whole body focus, medical focus in undergrad. So I think that's going to be beneficial, not just to medically focused SLPs, but to others as well. And then in graduate school, you could track. You could maybe have a few semesters that are overlapped, and then the last 4 semesters, track and specialize. And even so, if you go back and think like, well, I want to work with phonology, why do I need to take a general physiology course? Maybe you don't, but maybe if you want to track in your program, that would be a prerequisite for that track, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of different options, and I think that we can do better. And there's been a lot to really illuminate that we are not doing as good of a job as we could do. And you can critique any health profession, and that's not my intention. Is not to make people feel bad. I mean, all arrows would be pointing to me, like, Tim, you're an idiot. Like that's where it would be if I were just out there trying to critique. But the purpose of bringing this to light is so that we can make it better. And I think that there are ways to do that, and I think that they're attainable. Like, you've heard the argument, well, but you can go and work in a hospital, and if you don't like that, you can go work in a preschool. And it's like, that's great. Like, that's a nice luxury that you have as a professional. But if it's harming patient care, please don't bring that up again. Like, like that type of thing. Like, it's not worth the detriment that it can bring to throwing thickened liquids at everybody because we don't know anything else to do. And then people get dehydrated and get urinary tract infections and go batty and then go on hospice because the doctor's like, well, they've had a decline and they're 89 years old. We don't know if anything's going to happen when they might have had 10 more years. Like, there's just so much to it. And so anyway, I'll stop talking now.
I love the passion, though. I mean, and thinking through it, and I do think it's great that you say, you're not critiquing, you're bringing things, to light. Especially with all the things in our profession right now in recent years, I think the ability to have, professional dialogue about how do we move the profession forward is really important. And so I think bringing it through the tone of like, hey, let's highlight and let's brainstorm. Like, what are our options for how we can move this forward? That's really cool.
Well, there are a lot of parallels between personal development and development as a field overall. And so like, I realize I am critiquing, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to critique people. I want to critique just a broader status because I don't want it to become personal. And so, but if you think about personal development, there's a quote, I think it's Daniel Goleman, but I honestly forget who it is. It's, if I don't know myself, how can I lead myself? If I can't lead myself, how can I lead other people? And so if we're not willing to embrace this vulnerability to look at what we need to grow as a professional, then we're not going to attain the greatest that we could. And so it's the same thing as a field. We have to be willing to look in the shadows to try to better understand where we need to be going as a field to be able to direct us in the place that we should be going.
Yeah, I mean, and how often do we talk either through professional development or even in talking with students, and we say, oh, we have to be reflective, or we need to be reflective, or figure out how to be reflective. I think your point too is like, as a field, we need to be reflective too, which is great. So speaking of that, and speaking about personal development, so if you had it all to do over again, is there anything that you would do differently? Why or why not?
That's so hard because I am incredibly grateful to be where I am right now, that I wouldn't want to mess that up with something that maybe has a higher probability of a positive outcome. Just, I'm extremely grateful. If I had to do it over again, I probably would have done it a little younger, and I would have liked to pursue a PhD. I don't want to sacrifice the clinical, but the reason why I would want to pursue a PhD, two primary reasons. One is to be able to figure out some new stuff with research, and you don't have to have a PhD to do research, but it's harder if you don't. But another big part of that is, at least at the time we're recording, and maybe not by the time this gets out, but I'm going to, fingers crossed, I'm going to hope and pray that for accreditation for master's programs in speech pathology, you have to have so many individuals with what is called a terminal degree. And what is called a terminal degree, certain people get to choose what that is. And so in my mind, so it's like a 51% ratio. And if you don't have enough, then you can't meet accreditation, or you get doctored, different things. I don't know exactly what happens. But it really inhibits people who are brilliant with master's degrees or clinical doctorates from being able to reach clinicians, student clinicians, and help them to translate what they are learning theoretically into clinical practice. And so in my mind, big soapbox of mine, it's a clinical degree, right? It's a speech pathology. You go through this degree to become a clinician. You don't do it to become a teacher. You don't do it to become a researcher, although you can become those things, and that's great. You do it to be a clinician. And so it would make sense to me that a doctorate in a clinical doctorate would be considered a terminal degree. It's a degree higher. It's the highest degree that you can get clinically. So why wouldn't that be a terminal degree? But that hasn't caught up yet. But a research doctorate is considered to be, and a teaching doctorate is, which this is not in any way a criticism of people with PhDs or with EDs. I just said, I wish I had a PhD because it's hard. In my opinion, I think they're harder. I think they're more rigorous degrees. And that's nothing against the SLPD, but that's one of the reasons why so many brilliant people. But I think you get more diversity in clinical perspective sometimes too, if you have EDs, PhDs, MAs, MSs, SLPDs, all of that background.
So you mentioned research a little bit. What are those nagging research questions that you have? What would you like to explore more about our field?
Um, Very good question. So we've looked more lately at what's normal or typical. So what's typical highway movement? What's typical as far as lateral penetration or aspiration, that type of thing. But I think we need to look at it more to better understand. We need to look at that to better understand, so we're not overdiagnosing people with dysphagia who might just be on one end of the spectrum of what's typical. Because typical is a range. It's not just like, your hyoid's going to move 1 centimeter. There's an entire range there. Just not, excuse me. It's also like with height, someone might be 5'3", someone might be 6'3", but that's still, relatively typical, maybe on the fringe a little bit for the person who's 6'3". But that, and also what's functional. So there's a difference between what's typical and functional. So someone might be 6'10", that's not typical, or they might be 4'8", and that's not typical either. Might be totally functional. It might carry advantages. They might be a center in basketball and be able to just be awesome at what they do. And so the idea of what's functional, so how dysphagia impacts nutrition, hydration, pulmonary status, which there's research going on there. I think there could be more research layered, of course. There's that, but there's also like the translational science of implementation science of translating research to clinical practice. What works well, what doesn't work well. Education. I mean, there's a lot. My mind goes in all different directions. So there are a lot of things. All the things.
Yeah, lots of potential directions. And earlier you also mentioned the quality of life aspect, which I think is such a huge part of this dysphagia care and thinking about end of life decisions and all of those things that I think we're not always adequately prepared for in our professional training.
I agree.
Yeah, another thing that kind of comes to mind is, as you've been talking, and I've mentioned, obviously my area is not medical speech language pathology, but I'm hearing parallels. You saying like, hey, we're trying to complete these diagnostic evaluations of individuals, but our protocols are not giving us all the functional information. I think, oh my gosh, like we say the exact same thing on the pediatric side too. And how a lot of times that we're going through, flipping the charts or going through the questions or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well, that's, a point or not a point, but what does that really tell us about what this kid can do? So I think it's interesting. I hadn't, until you were talking, I didn't really think about that piece being a parallel too, of like maybe having some similar issues on the diagnostic side between functional and, obviously we have to qualify, but yeah.
So prior to being a speech pathologist, could either of you tell me what an abacus is?
No.
Yes.
Okay, I probably couldn't. But the body Boston naming test, you get docked for not knowing what an abacus is, and that's I realize there's times and dates, but also the idea of impairment. Like if you're looking at the World Health Organization's international classification framework, impairment, what you can and can't do versus the manifestation of that impairment, the function, how it's impacting your daily life. And so I think what you're highlighting, at least part of it, is how so many of these assessments really look at impairment, but not necessarily how that manifests in your daily life.
Yeah. And Tim, how do you see that also interfacing with cultural variables, right? When we're talking about feeding and swallowing, food is so culturally dependent, and how we eat and when we eat and what we eat and what we consider to be normal or quote unquote abnormal ways of eating. How do you see that show up in your work?
Well, this is an interesting topic. So I don't know, it was maybe a week ago, I was talking with somebody about chewing, right? Because those are the fun things we talk about.
The kind of conversations you have.
Yeah. But you've probably read in a note somewhere, like lengthy mastication, blah, 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 and just how long this person's chewing. But I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, people were taught chew your food this many times, that sort of thing. And that's a generational thing. And therefore, kind of a cultural thing with that. But cultures who eat differently, especially in my opinion, some of the voluntary parts of the swallow, there are things that we do that are going to be shaped by the environment that we were raised in, or the things that we value, and that type of thing. And so that's one manifestation I see of it. But I mean, a lot of it also is tied in with paternalism and how we want to tell people, this is what you need to do. Like you've got to do this. You've got to eat pureed foods or you're going to choke and die. Like that sort of thing. Like this complex of trying to reach in and save people versus finding out what it is that they value and they embrace and helping to facilitate that. So those are two things that I see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was wondering, because you've talked about lots of different experiences. Um, is there maybe one or two professional experiences that really kind of stick out to you as like, aha, like this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, or this is why I went into this field. Sometimes people have really cool just things that stick out to them, a story or maybe interaction with a patient or a mentor. Any thoughts on that?
That's a tough one because I feel like it's so cumulative that
Hmm.
everything, just so many things together, not necessarily one experience or another, but just kind of this compilation of positive experiences through patients where you just walked away from that and you're like, yes, that's why I'm in this field, because you can see the difference you make. And, the patient is very grateful and different things like that. And then there are other scenarios where you're learning about, Hawaii had me teach motor speech disorders class, and I had to go back and review some stuff, right? Because there's the cortical bulbar, cortical spinal, pyramidal, extra pyramidal, upper lower motor, all of this stuff. And so I was preparing, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I get paid to learn this stuff, like to relearn this stuff. So I was like, yeah, that's great. So that was neat. But then the mentorship, just having you know I think there are so many people who have achieved such high status in our field and high accomplishments within our field who are still extremely humble. And so to find a profession where that exists, it makes me feel very grateful to be able to network and interact, because they're not so pretentious as to be the, step back, you non-PhD foul, that type of thing.
And so you mentioned humility as a really
Mhm.
positive characteristic for people who are mentoring. What other characteristics, especially as someone who now provides continuing education, do you think are important for people trying to help teach and grow others in the field?
Hmm. Empathy is huge. I think that's part of humility. Humility, of course, we've talked about that, but I don't want to go without explicitly saying humility is extremely important. Or yeah, humility, empathy, and trying to, or being willing to try to understand where people come from and their perspectives. That you see this with kids with ADHD, that these things that we thought sometimes were deviant behaviors, we just didn't understand what they were going through, how their body chemistry is, that changes the tendency to behave from one way to another. And so I think that empathy helps us to better understand as educators how we can facilitate the best in our students. It's back to that idea. If I don't know myself, how can I lead myself? So that's predicated on leadership. And as an instructor, you're a leader. You're helping to forge a path for intellect and so many other things. So there's that component of it. And then it's, if I don't know myself, how can I lead other people? But there's also this thought of, if I don't know my audience, how can I try to lead them? Because what's going to work for one person isn't going to work for everybody else. And so there's that personalized components to it, the kind of the mentorship and the coaching component that's a bit more individualized. So there's that in teaching methodology, like understanding better how people learn. The effect of positive reinforcement, the effects of hands-on learning, the benefit in group work, those types of things, versus just getting up in front of the classroom and being, it's this and it's that and it's this and it's that and that sort of thing too.
Well, I think it might be time to move on to our rapid round of questioning. Unless there's just some burning comment or another topic you'd like to talk about, Tim, today.
Oh
You
my
ready
gosh.
to go to our rapid round?
Yeah, let's go to the rapid round. That sounds great.
All right, so we're going to do 90 seconds on the clock. If we come to a question that you do not want to answer, you can say pass. Ready, set, go.
Okay, cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Sunrise or sunset?
Mm, I like them both. It depends.
Okay, coffee, tea, or soda?
Coffee.
What is the strangest talent you possess?
Oh man, I can walk on the tops of my toes, like on my tiptoes, but on the tops, it's weird.
Oh, like a ballerina.
Impressive. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
What do you like to do to relax?
Go outside and just sit. I don't know, walk.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning person. Didn't used to be that way though.
What is your favorite snack?
Oh crap, probably candy, unfortunately.
Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
What is your go-to boredom buster for long meetings?
Start joking around and make light of the meeting.
City life or country?
In between.
If you could speak any language fluently, what would it be?
I would say Spanish. Yeah, anyway, sorry, I could go into why, but I know this is rapid, so.
What is your go-to karaoke song?
Oh dear. I don't know. Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. That's one.
Okay, here is a feeding focused one. What is the strangest food combination you enjoy?
Oh dear. I know people have told me this, but graham crackers and milk, that's not that strange. I mean, maybe it is, but.
That's the nutrition closet special right there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Get your graham cracker pack, get your box of milk. Thank you so much. That's 90 seconds.
Well, thank you for humoring us with 90 seconds of what may have been uncomfortable, but we learned so much, you know?
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy with just, work and teaching and all, website and podcast. And thank you for being passionate in our field and also being willing to mentor and work with, future generations. So like I said, we'll link some things on the podcast so people can come and learn more about what you do. And I really guess there's only one thing left to say, and that's way to be, Tim. Way to be. And perhaps someone that's in the audience or listening has thought that maybe, just maybe, some of what we've chatted about today just might be a way to be for them too. So thank you so much, and we'll see everybody next round. Have a great day, everybody.